With North Africa and Italy out of the way, the United States can now begin an offensive on the European theater in mass scale. The Soviets had wanted the United States to attack and to invade France earlier. We reprioritized. Now that's out of the way, we can reorganize a mass scale invasion of the European mainland. The Germans figured this would happen at one point, and they suspected that should there be an invasion of Europe from the north, they would come from England and immediately cross the narrowest part of the English Channel into an area that was closest to England from there. So the Germans put a mass amount of troops over there to where they suspected an invasion would come. In somewhat of an act of subterfuge, the Allies, yeah, we are setting up an invasion, but it's not going to be where the Germans think it is. So, roughly 3 million Allied troops between the Americans, the Canadians, and the British set up mass operations in southern England, cross over the English Channel, and they stormed the beaches of Normandy in northern France in an area different than what the Germans anticipated. They thought it would take place elsewhere. And if you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes of the movie depict what it was like to invade the beaches of Normandy. And if you take the time to watch it, I will warn you, it is incredibly graphic. It is very harrowing. It's not for the faint of heart. But reading articles and publications and watching interviews and videos of people who were there, it is a very, very well done depiction about what it was like to storm the beaches of Normandy in the face of Nazi weaponry. And then, of course, the things that would happen after the invasion would follow. And there's a storyline in Saving Private Ryan as well. Otherwise, though, Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy, take the German army there, and then, of course, over the next few months, Allied forces begin to make an eastward advance, slowly liberating various different aspects and parts of France, eventually making their way to Paris, and they liberate Paris and remove German control from France. And the French liberation, the liberation of Paris in particular, was a massive, massive victory for the Allied forces. You are now putting a massive dent in German control to where you can kind of see something inevitable really starting to happen now that the Americans are large scale invading. The Allies eventually drive the Nazis out of France and Belgium completely by mid-September of 1944. You're continuing to make a further eastward advance. And in the meantime, the Soviets are making a westward advance towards Berlin. We're making a likewise eastern advance. You can kind of see the inevitable happening. But before you see the inevitable, you see the German military making somewhat of a last stance. They're putting everything out there in the late fall and early winter of 1944 so as to put a last ditch effort to thwart the Allied offensive on their way to Berlin. That's known as the Battle of the Bulge. So, Allied forces on the west making their way eastward. If you look at the map on the next slide, you'll kind of see this kind of bulging curve. That is the last Nazi offensive to thwart Allied troops coming in towards them. Basically, Hitler threw everything he had, all of his last reserves, so as to try and hopefully stem the tide. And it worked for a short while, but we had too much to overcome. And once we overcame the Battle of the Bulge, the inevitable was going to happen. The Soviets, by late April, were making their way to the outskirts of Berlin. And upon hearing this news, Adolf Hitler commits suicide. Supposedly, he shot himself. I don't know. There are many different conspiracy theories about Adolf Hitler, about how he escaped and he made his way to South America and this various different thing. I don't know if I believe any of that. I do believe that he committed suicide because he was going to have an awful penalty to pay should he be imprisoned. It'd be pretty awful, especially with the Holocaust. Um, a few days later, about a week or so later, in first week of May, upon hearing news that Hitler had committed suicide and seeing how they were surrounded by the Soviets on one side, the Americans and the Brits on the other, German troops officially surrender. Okay, so by mid-May, Germany is defeated. They're done. And in doing so, we can now focus a little bit more of our attention on uncovering the ugly aspects of the Holocaust, and now we can liberate all the people involved in the Holocaust. And as it becomes more public knowledge, it's very harrowing for people to understand what exactly went on at many of these Holocaust prison camps. And the treachery, the violence, the grotesque methods of executing people, that all came to light. But now that Germany is defeated, cleaning up Europe, and then now we can focus the remainder of our attention out in the Pacific.